Your soulmate was asked who they would marry tomorrow if they had the chance. Their answer shocked everyone. My beloved child. The question sounded harmless at first, almost like something people ask when they are joking around. Your soulmate was sitting among people who believed they already understood their heart when someone suddenly leaned forward and asked, if you had the chance to marry anyone tomorrow, who would it be? A few people laughed. Someone immediately mentioned the person everyone expected them to choose. But your soulmate didn't laugh. Their expression changed. Their eyes dropped for a second, and the entire mood in the room shifted. Because this wasn't a question they needed time to think about. Somewhere inside them, an answer had already been waiting. And when they finally looked up, one person noticed something strange. Their hands were trembling. Why would such a simple question affect them this deeply? Don't skip, because what happened before they gave their answer explains why everyone became completely silent. Someone tried to make things easier by saying, "Come on, you know who you'd pick." But your soulmate quietly replied, "Actually, I don't think any of you know." That sentence erased every smile in the room. One person stared at them as though they had just broken an unspoken agreement. Another asked whether there was someone nobody knew about. Your soulmate hesitated, but instead of changing the subject, they admitted something nobody expected. There had been one person they had imagined standing beside for a very long time. Someone they had tried to push out of their thoughts. Someone they had been told was too complicated, too uncertain, or simply impossible. Yet whenever they pictured making that promise tomorrow, not someday, not when everything became perfect, the same person kept appearing in their mind. And then someone asked the question that made your soulmate's face reveal more than their words ever had: does this person even know you still feel that way? For several seconds, your soulmate said nothing. Then came the answer, probably not. That was when everyone realized this conversation wasn't hypothetical anymore. Someone in that room knew exactly who your soulmate meant, and their reaction was immediate. They sat forward and whispered, "You can't seriously mean them." Your soulmate turned toward them, calm but visibly emotional, and said, "Why not?" The room froze. Suddenly, old conversations, warnings, and choices nobody had questioned before seemed to carry a completely different meaning. Your soulmate had apparently been pressured to believe that choosing this person would disappoint people around them. But when asked whom they would marry tomorrow if nobody could interfere, their heart had gone straight back to the same person. To you. Yet before your soulmate could actually say your name aloud, someone interrupted with a revelation that changed the entire conversation. Before you answer that question, there's something about them you were never told. The interruption hit your soulmate harder than anyone expected. Their eyes immediately locked onto the person who had spoken. "What do you mean, something I was never told?" they asked. Suddenly, nobody seemed comfortable anymore. The person who had been so confident moments earlier began choosing every word carefully. They admitted that long ago, when your soulmate was being encouraged to move on from you, certain details had been deliberately left out. Your soulmate had been made to believe you had stopped caring, that you had accepted the distance, and that choosing you would only lead to disappointment. But apparently, that wasn't the full story. There had been a conversation about you that your soulmate never heard. And the strangest part? Someone in that room had known about it the entire time. Your soulmate looked around slowly and asked, "So while I was trying to forget them, you all knew there was more to this?" Nobody answered immediately, and that silence said enough. Then one person finally admitted that your soulmate's feelings for you had frightened certain people, not because you had done something terrible, but because everyone could see how serious those feelings had become. Your soulmate wasn't casually interested in you. They had been imagining a real future. A home. A commitment. Even marriage. That was why people kept pushing other possibilities in front of them, hoping time would eventually erase you. But it hadn't. And now this simple question, who would you marry tomorrow, had exposed what months of pretending could never bury. Your soulmate leaned back, visibly processing everything, before quietly saying, "You made me believe I was the only one holding on." Then came another revelation. Someone admitted there had once been evidence that you hadn't completely walked away either. Your soulmate immediately asked what kind of evidence, but the answer didn't come easily. Apparently, something connected to you had reached someone close to them, a message, a conversation, a small but unmistakable sign that your feelings were not as finished as your soulmate had been told. Yet instead of showing it to them, someone decided it would be better if they never saw it. Your soulmate's expression hardened. "You decided that for me?" they asked. No one could defend it now. Then the original marriage question came back into the room. Someone quietly said, "So knowing this, would your answer still be the same?" Your soulmate didn't hesitate anymore. They leaned forward and said, "My answer was never the problem. I know exactly who I would marry tomorrow." But just as everyone waited for your name, your soulmate added something nobody expected. "The real question is whether they would still choose me after they find out what I did." That confession changed the atmosphere instantly. Until that moment, everyone had assumed your soulmate's biggest struggle was admitting whom they still loved. But now there was another secret hiding underneath everything. Someone asked, "What did you do?" Your soulmate looked down, and for the first time that evening, their confidence disappeared. They admitted that during the period when everyone was telling them to forget you, they had made a decision they deeply regretted. They had allowed you to believe their silence meant they no longer cared. There were moments when they wanted to reach out, moments when your name was already typed on their screen, but fear stopped them. And eventually, that fear turned into distance. "They probably think I chose everyone else over them," your soulmate whispered. Then someone asked the painful question nobody else had dared to say aloud, "Didn't you?" Your soulmate didn't defend themselves. They simply said, "For a while, yes. And that's what I can't forgive myself for." The room became completely still. They explained that choosing everyone else's advice had never made their feelings for you disappear. In fact, every attempt to imagine a future with someone else only made one truth harder to ignore. When they pictured marriage, your face appeared. When they imagined waking up beside someone years from now, somehow it was still you. And when they were asked who they would marry tomorrow if nothing stood in the way, they didn't need another night to decide. Stay till the end, because the person sitting across from your soulmate suddenly asked something even more revealing. If they walked through that door right now and asked whether you still wanted them, what would you say? This time there was no hesitation. Your soulmate looked straight ahead and said, "Would tell them I never stopped." Someone gasped quietly, because those words confirmed what everyone had been avoiding. Then your soulmate finally said your name. Not vaguely. Not indirectly. Your name. They said that if tomorrow truly gave them one chance to marry the person their heart had chosen, they would choose you. But instead of relief, another person in the room looked terrified. Your soulmate noticed immediately and demanded to know why. After several uncomfortable seconds, that person admitted there was still one missing piece, something that had happened after your soulmate pulled away from you. Something they believed could completely change whether you would ever accept them again. Your soulmate stood up and asked, "What happened?" The answer came quietly, "You need to know what they were told about you first." Your soulmate remained standing, staring at the person who had just spoken. "What exactly were they told about me?" The answer came slowly. During the period when your soulmate had gone silent, someone close to the situation had apparently allowed you to believe that the silence was intentional, that your soulmate had already made their choice and wanted you completely out of their future. No one had told you about the nights they almost reached out. No one mentioned how often they asked about you or how strongly they resisted being pushed towards someone else. Instead, you were given the simplest and most painful version. They moved on. Your soulmate's face changed immediately. So they didn't walk away because they stopped caring, they whispered. They walked away because they thought I wanted them to. That realization seemed to break something open inside them. Suddenly, all the unanswered questions made sense. The distance, the silence, the way everything between you had ended without the conversation either of you truly needed. Someone reminded your soulmate that they still had a choice. They could leave the past untouched and avoid reopening something complicated. But your soulmate shook their head. "That's exactly what I've been doing," they said. "And look where it got me." Then they returned to the question that had started everything. If they could marry anyone tomorrow, who would it be? Their answer was still you. But now they understood that saying your name in a room full of shocked people was the easy part. The difficult part would be facing you and admitting why they disappeared when their heart had been telling them to stay. Then something happened that nobody had planned. One person quietly reached for their phone and said, "Before you decide what to do next, there's something you should hear." Your soulmate immediately asked what they meant. The person revealed that they had recently spoken with someone who knew how you had reacted after believing your soulmate had chosen another future. And apparently, you had said one sentence that stayed with them. Your soulmate stepped closer. What did they say? But instead of answering, the person unlocked the phone and searched for something they had saved. Everyone watched as your soulmate's breathing changed. Whatever was on that screen could tell them whether there was still a chance, or whether their silence had cost them everything. Then the phone was placed in their hand, and your soulmate froze when they saw the first words. The first words on that screen were not angry. That almost made them harder to read. They were something you had said after someone asked whether you would ever speak to your soulmate again. "I never needed them to be perfect. I just needed them to be honest with me." Your soulmate read the sentence twice. Their eyes stayed fixed on it as the room went silent again. There was more beneath it. You had apparently admitted that what hurt most wasn't simply losing them. It was never knowing whether the connection had been real to them in the first place. Your soulmate swallowed hard and whispered, They thought I didn't love them. Someone answered, what else were they supposed to think? That question landed heavily, because your soulmate finally understood what their silence had communicated without a single word. But there was another sentence saved beneath the first, and this one changed everything. You had reportedly said that if your soulmate ever came back with the truth, not excuses, not half answers, but the complete truth, you would at least listen. Nobody could promise what would happen afterward. You hadn't promised forgiveness. You hadn't promised another chance. But you hadn't completely closed the door either. Your soulmate looked up, stunned. Why didn't anyone tell me this? The person beside them admitted they were afraid your soulmate would immediately run back to you and make an emotional decision. Your soulmate almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. You mean the decision I just made when someone asked who I would marry tomorrow? Nobody answered. Because now everyone understood that your soulmate's answer had not been spontaneous at all. It had been buried inside them long before tonight. Then your soulmate did something nobody expected. They handed the phone back and said, I'm done letting other people speak for me. Someone asked whether they were seriously considering contacting you after all this time. Your soulmate replied, if I can say in front of everyone that I would marry them tomorrow, then I should be brave enough to tell them why. But before they could move, the person who had originally challenged their answer stopped them. There's one more thing, they said. Your soulmate turned around, visibly frustrated. What now? The person hesitated, then revealed that the question about marriage hadn't been asked randomly. Someone had deliberately brought it up because they already knew your soulmate's answer, and they wanted to force the truth into the open before something happened tomorrow that might make reaching you much harder. Your soulmate stopped cold. What happens tomorrow? They asked, and suddenly the person who had started this entire conversation looked far less confident. They admitted they had recently heard that you were about to make an important decision, one that could change how easily your soulmate could reach you afterward. Nobody knew exactly what you would choose, but it was enough to frighten someone who had watched your soulmate pretend for months that they could live without you. That was why the marriage question had been asked tonight. It wasn't entertainment. It was a test. They wanted to know whether your soulmate would still choose you if there were no more time for excuses. And the moment your soulmate answered, everyone finally saw the truth they had been hiding. Instead of panicking, your soulmate became strangely calm. They asked one question, does this decision mean they're choosing someone else? Nobody could say for certain. That uncertainty hurt more than a simple yes or no. Your soulmate looked at the people around them and said, then I'm not going to invent another story in my head. That's what caused this mess in the first place. Someone warned them that reaching out now might reopen old wounds. Your soulmate agreed. But then they said something that silenced everyone. I'm not contacting them to demand another chance. I'm contacting them because they deserve to know that when I was asked who I would marry tomorrow, there was only one name in my mind. For the first time all evening, nobody tried to argue. Your soulmate reached for their phone, but before typing anything, they stared at your name for several seconds. So much history sat behind those few letters, everything they should have said, every moment fear won, every misunderstanding that grew inside the silence. Then they began writing. Not a dramatic promise. Not an excuse. just the truth. But halfway through, they suddenly stopped. A notification had appeared on the screen, and the timing was almost impossible. Someone beside them noticed their expression and asked, "What is it?" Your soulmate turned the phone slightly, and everyone saw why they had frozen. The notification was connected to you. After all those months of wondering whether the door between you had completely closed, something had just changed, and whatever your soulmate saw made them delete the message they had been writing and whisper, "No. I need to tell them differently." What appeared on that screen wasn't a confession from you, and it wasn't an invitation. It was something smaller, yet somehow more powerful, proof that the line between you had not completely disappeared. Your soulmate stared at it and realized that sending a carefully edited message would only repeat the same mistake, hiding behind words until the safest version of the truth remained. "I've spent too long saying nothing because I was afraid of saying the wrong thing," they admitted. Someone asked what they planned to do instead. Your soulmate looked around the room where everyone had just heard them choose you and said, "I'm going to speak honestly. No one else is going to explain my heart for me again." But there was still one question making their hands shake. After everything that happened, would you even want to hear their voice? They stepped away from everyone and opened your contact. For a moment, their finger hovered over the call button. Then someone behind them said, "Before you do this, are you absolutely sure about what you said earlier?" Your soulmate turned around. "About marrying them?" The person nodded. This was their final opportunity to soften the answer, turn it into nostalgia, or pretend emotion had carried them away. Instead, your soulmate became even more certain. "If I had the chance tomorrow, yes. I would choose them." Someone quietly asked why. Your soulmate answered, "Because every future I tried to imagine without them felt like something I was forcing myself to accept." Nobody laughed now. Nobody challenged them. The answer that had shocked everyone minutes earlier suddenly sounded less like an impulsive confession and more like a truth your soulmate had finally stopped running from. Then your soulmate pressed the button. One ring. Then another. With every second, their confidence collided with the possibility that you might not answer at all. On the next ring, something changed on the screen. Your soulmate straightened, and everyone nearby became silent. The connection had gone through. For several seconds, your soulmate couldn't speak. Then they finally said your name and followed it with the sentence they should have given you long ago, "There's something I need to tell you myself, because too many people have spoken for me." But before they could explain the marriage question, they heard something from the other end that completely changed their expression. You already knew about the conversation. Somehow, you already knew what they had been asked, and more importantly, you knew the answer they had given. The only mystery left was who had told you, and why they had reached you before your soulmate could. Your soulmate's voice dropped immediately. "Who told you?" they asked. There was a pause on the other end, long enough to make everyone in the room exchange nervous looks. Then you revealed that someone had contacted you shortly after the marriage question was asked. They hadn't shared every detail. They had simply told you that your name had come up in a conversation you were never supposed to hear about, and that your soulmate had finally said something they had refused to admit for a long time. Your soulmate slowly turned toward the people behind them. Someone avoided their eyes. That was enough. But instead of confronting anyone, your soulmate asked you the only question that mattered now. When you heard what I said, what did you think? Your answer wasn't what they expected. You didn't immediately say you were happy. You didn't promise another chance. You told them that hearing they would marry you tomorrow sounded beautiful, but it also raised a painful question. If they felt that strongly, why had they allowed so much time to pass without telling you? Your soulmate closed their eyes. There was no easy answer, and for once, they didn't search for one. They admitted they had been afraid of disappointing people, of being rejected, and eventually of discovering that they had waited too long. But none of that excuses what I did, they said. I let you believe something that wasn't true. Then you asked the question that made their voice tremble, so what is true? Your soulmate looked back at the room full of people who had watched this secret finally surface. Then they walked somewhere quieter and answered you without anyone else influencing a single word. The truth is, when they asked me who I would marry tomorrow if I had the chance, I thought of you before they even finished the question. Silence followed. Your soulmate continued, and I'm not telling you this because I expect you to suddenly trust me again. I'm telling you because you deserve to hear it from me. For several seconds, there was nothing from your side of the call. Then you finally spoke, and what you said caught your soulmate completely off guard. You told them the answer itself wasn't the most shocking thing you had learned tonight. Someone had also told you why the marriage question had been asked in the first place. And according to you, there was one detail about tomorrow that your soulmate still didn't know. Your soulmate went completely quiet. What detail? They asked, and this time there was no room left for anyone else's version of the story. You explained that tomorrow's decision wasn't about choosing another person at all. It was about you finally deciding whether to close this chapter permanently. After months of uncertainty, you had reached the point where you couldn't keep waiting for answers that might never come. Someone who knew this had realized your soulmate was running out of time, and that was why the question had been placed in front of them tonight. If every excuse disappeared and they could marry anyone tomorrow, who would they choose? Your soulmate finally understood. They hadn't been asked to predict some imaginary future. They had been forced to confront what they might lose if they stayed silent one more day. Then you said something that surprised them even more. You had never needed a promise of marriage to prove their feelings. What you needed was clarity. I needed to know whether I mattered enough for you to choose me when choosing me became uncomfortable, you said. Your soulmate didn't interrupt. They knew this was the part they couldn't escape. Saying your name in front of everyone had shocked the room, but choosing you privately, when family opinions, fear, and uncertainty were still present, was something different. Your soulmate took a breath and admitted, I failed at that before. Then they added, but tonight I finally understood something. I was so afraid of losing everyone's approval that I nearly lost the person I actually wanted a life with. And for the first time, you heard them take responsibility without hiding behind anyone else. There was a long silence before you asked one final question. If everyone in that room told you tomorrow that choosing me was a mistake, what would you do? Your soulmate turned toward the doorway. Several people were still waiting outside, wondering what was happening on the call. This was no longer about impressing them with a dramatic answer. Your soulmate quietly said, I would still choose you. But I wouldn't ask you to marry me tomorrow just because I said I would. I'd earn back the trust first. Those words changed something between you. Yet before either of you could say more, your soulmate heard movement behind them. The person who had secretly contacted you was standing in the doorway, holding something your soulmate immediately recognized. And when your soulmate saw what it was, they whispered, "Where did you get that?" Because this wasn't another message about you. It was something your soulmate had written about marrying you long before tonight's question was ever asked. Your soulmate stared at the folded page in disbelief. They knew it instantly because they had written it months earlier, during one of those nights when missing you became impossible to ignore. It had never been meant for anyone else to see. On that page, your soulmate had written down the future they were too afraid to speak about aloud. Where they imagined living, the kind of ordinary life they wanted, and one sentence they could barely look at now: "If I ever marry someone because my heart is completely certain, I already know who it will be." Your name was written beneath it. The person holding the page admitted they had found it accidentally and kept it because they believed your soulmate would eventually need proof of their own truth. But your soulmate wasn't relieved. They were stunned. "You knew all this time?" they asked. The answer was yes. You were still on the phone, hearing enough to understand that tonight's confession hadn't appeared from nowhere. Your soulmate had imagined marrying you long before anyone asked that shocking question. But instead of using the page to convince you, they said something unexpected: "I don't want an old letter to pressure you into believing me." They wanted their choices now to prove what those words meant. Then you asked when the page had been written. Your soulmate gave you the date, and silence followed. That date mattered. It was during the exact period when you had been led to believe they were forgetting you. While you were trying to accept that their feelings had disappeared, your soulmate had privately been writing your name beneath thoughts of marriage. The contradiction was painful, but it finally exposed just how badly fear and outside influence had distorted what both of you believed. Then the person holding the page admitted there was a reason they had brought it out tonight. The folded sheet wasn't the only thing they had found with your name on it. There was another note written later, after your soulmate had already pulled away, and that one contained a decision nobody in the room had heard about. Your soulmate's expression changed. "What decision?" they asked. The person hesitated, because unlike the first page, this second note wasn't simply about love. It described something your soulmate had planned to do if they ever got one genuine chance to speak with you again. You heard the tension through the phone and asked what was happening. Your soulmate demanded to see the second note, but the person holding it looked directly at them and said, "Before I give this to you, you need to remember what you promised yourself at the bottom." Your soulmate froze. They suddenly remembered exactly what they had written. And why fulfilling that promise could change everything between you tomorrow. The memory returned before your soulmate even touched the second note. At the bottom of that page, they had written a promise to themselves: if they ever received one honest chance to speak with you again, they would stop hiding behind other people's opinions and tell you everything, even the parts that made them look weak. The note had been written after another night when they almost contacted you and backed away at the last second. But there was one line your soulmate remembered more clearly than the rest: if they ever let me back into their life, I won't ask them to trust my words first. I'll show them through what I choose. Hearing that now changed the meaning of tonight's marriage question. Saying they would marry you tomorrow was powerful, but your soulmate suddenly realized that the real test had only begun. You were still listening when your soulmate asked for the note and read the remaining lines silently. Then they told you something they had never admitted before. During the time you believed they were moving on, there had been several opportunities for them to build a future elsewhere. People had encouraged it. Some had even insisted it would be easier. But every time the possibility became serious, your soulmate pulled back because committing to someone else while secretly wanting you felt dishonest. "That doesn't erase how I hurt you," they said. "But I need you to know I never replaced you in my heart." You didn't immediately respond. Then you asked, if you knew that, why did you need someone to ask you who you'd marry tomorrow before you finally spoke? Your soulmate had no comfortable answer. They simply said, "Because tonight I heard myself choose you out loud, and I realized how ridiculous it was that everyone else could hear the truth before you did." Then came the part nobody in the room expected. Your soulmate told you they weren't going to ask for an answer tonight. They weren't going to turn an emotional confession into pressure. Instead, they wanted to meet you tomorrow and tell you everything face to face. The interference, the fear, the silence, and every choice they regretted. You asked what would happen if, after hearing everything, you still decided to close the door. Your soulmate paused, then said, "I'll respect it. But at least you'll finally be deciding with the truth." Before you could answer, the person standing nearby unfolded the second note completely and noticed something written on the back. Your soulmate hadn't remembered putting anything there. Their face changed as they read it. Because beneath a date from months ago was a single question addressed directly to you, and it was almost identical to the question that had shocked everyone tonight. Your soulmate slowly turned the note over and read the forgotten question again. "If tomorrow were our only chance to choose without fear, would you choose me?" For a moment, they couldn't speak. Months before anyone had asked whom they would marry tomorrow, your soulmate had already been wrestling with almost the exact same question in private. The coincidence stunned everyone nearby, but it affected your soulmate differently. They finally understood that tonight hadn't created their feelings. It had exposed something they had been carrying all along. You heard their breathing change through the phone and asked what the note said. This time they didn't hide it. They read the question aloud, then quietly admitted, "I wrote that when I thought I'd never get the courage to ask you." Your response surprised them. You said there had been nights when you had wondered something almost identical, not whether marriage should happen tomorrow, but whether your soulmate would choose you if nobody else had a voice in the decision. That was the uncertainty that had stayed with you. Your soulmate had loved you privately, but when fear entered the picture, their actions had told a different story. "So don't tell me what you would do in a perfect world," you said. "Tell me what you're willing to do in this one." Your soulmate looked toward the people who had influenced them before. Then, without anger or theatrics, they said, "I'm willing to stop asking permission to be honest about who I love." Someone in the room immediately reacted, reminding them how complicated choosing you could become. Your soulmate didn't argue. They simply answered, "Complicated doesn't mean wrong." That sentence changed the room again. The same people who had once expected your soulmate to choose the easier path were now watching them refuse it. But you still hadn't answered the forgotten question written on the note. Your soulmate noticed and said, "You don't owe me an answer tonight. Then you surprised them by saying you wanted to answer, but only after hearing one last truth face to face tomorrow. There was something you had discovered during the months apart, something you had deliberately kept to yourself because you believed your soulmate had already chosen another future. Your soulmate's expression tightened. "Is it about us?" they asked. You said yes. Then you added that once they heard it, they might finally understand why you never completely stopped hoping either. And just before the call ended, you gave them a time and place for tomorrow, followed by 6 words your soulmate never expected to hear: "Bring that note. I have mine." Those 6 words stayed in your soulmate's mind long after the call ended. "I have mine." Nobody in the room understood what you meant, but your soulmate suddenly remembered something from months earlier. There had been a brief period when both of you seemed close to saying what you truly wanted, yet neither of you crossed that final distance. Your soulmate had written their question privately. Had you done the same? They looked again at the note in their hand, then at the people who had spent so long assuming they knew what was best. Someone asked whether they were really going to meet you tomorrow. Your soulmate answered without hesitation. Yes. Then came the inevitable warning. What if what they show you changes everything? Your soulmate folded the note carefully and replied, "Everything has already changed. Tomorrow I finally find out what was true." The next day, the question that had shocked everyone felt even heavier. If your soulmate could marry anyone tomorrow, they had said you. But now they were walking toward you knowing that a beautiful answer wouldn't be enough. When they finally saw you, neither of you rushed into some dramatic reunion. There was history between you. Hurt. Questions. Feelings neither of you could safely pretend were simple. Your soulmate placed their folded note between you and said, "This is what I wrote when I was too afraid to talk to you." You looked at it for several seconds, then reached into your belongings and pulled out your own folded page. Your soulmate stared at it. The paper looked worn, as though it had been opened and closed many times. "When did you write that?" they asked. Your answer made them freeze. It had been written during the same period as theirs. You handed it over, but before your soulmate opened it, you explained why you had kept it. You had written down what you would say if they ever came back and asked for one genuine chance. But after being told they had moved on, you never expected them to read it. Your soulmate unfolded the page slowly. The first lines weren't promises. They were questions about trust, timing, and whether love could survive when 2 people allowed fear to speak louder than honesty. Then your soulmate reached the final lines and stopped breathing for a second. You had written, "If you ever come back because you truly chose me, not because you're lonely, pressured, or afraid of losing me, then ask me again what I would choose." Your soulmate looked up at you, overwhelmed. But before they could speak, you pointed to one final sentence beneath it. That sentence contained the answer to the question everyone had been waiting to hear. Your soulmate lowered their eyes to that final sentence, and suddenly everything around them seemed to disappear. You had written, "If the truth is that you still choose me when you're finally free to choose for yourself, then my answer may be the same." Your soulmate read it again, slower this time. It wasn't an automatic yes. It wasn't forgiveness wrapped in a romantic sentence. It was something more meaningful, proof that your feelings had never vanished as completely as they had been led to believe. Your soulmate looked at you and asked, "You wrote this before last night?" You nodded. That meant while they were secretly imagining marrying you, you had been privately wondering whether they would ever return because they genuinely chose you. Two people had been carrying almost the same unanswered question while believing the other had already let go. But you weren't finished. You told your soulmate that there was a difference between wanting someone and being ready to build a life with them. If they truly meant what they said in that room, if you were genuinely the person they would marry tomorrow given the chance, then you needed to understand what had changed inside them. Your soulmate didn't reach for an easy romantic answer. They admitted that last night had forced them to hear their own truth without preparation. When someone asked the question, there was no time to construct the answer everyone expected. Your name simply came first. "That's when I realized something," they told you. "I wasn't confused about whom I wanted. I was afraid of what choosing them would require from me." You asked, "And are you still afraid?" Your soulmate answered, "Yes. I'm just not letting fear make the decision anymore." For a moment, neither of you spoke. Then you reached for your note and placed it beside theirs. 2 pages. 2 private confessions. 2 versions of the same future that almost never met because other voices had become louder than your own. Your soulmate looked at you and said, "I meant what I said. If someone asked me again today who I would marry tomorrow, my answer would still be you." But instead of asking you to answer immediately, they added, "I want to know whether we can rebuild what should have been protected in the first place." That was when you revealed the final detail you had deliberately saved for this meeting. The person who contacted you last night hadn't merely told you about your soulmate's answer. They had also told you exactly who first suggested asking the marriage question, and when your soulmate heard that person's name, they realized the entire conversation had been set in motion by the last person either of you would have suspected. Your soulmate stared at you, waiting for the name. When you finally said it, their expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. The person who had suggested asking that marriage question was someone who had once encouraged your soulmate to move on from you. Someone who had watched them struggle, defended the distance, and insisted that reopening the connection would only create more pain. Yet recently, that same person had discovered the truth about how badly both of you had been misled. They had seen your soulmate still react whenever your name was mentioned. They had found out that you hadn't stopped caring the way everyone assumed. And instead of arranging another private conversation where your soulmate could hide behind uncertainty, they created one question impossible to escape: if you could marry anyone tomorrow, who would it be? They already suspected the answer. They simply wanted everyone else to hear it too. Your soulmate leaned back, stunned by how carefully that moment had been created. Suddenly, they remembered why the room had gone so strangely quiet before they answered. Certain people hadn't been waiting to hear whom they would choose. They were waiting to see whether your soulmate would finally admit what they already knew. You asked whether that made the confession feel less genuine. Your soulmate immediately shook their head. "No. Nobody put your name in my mind." That was the part that mattered. The question may have been intentional, but the answer had belonged entirely to them. Then your soulmate looked at the 2 folded notes between you and smiled faintly for the first time. "Maybe everyone was shocked because they thought I'd choose the easiest person to build a future with," they said. But my heart never asked what was easiest. You looked at them carefully and asked, then what is it asking now? Your soulmate didn't say, marry me tomorrow. They understood that love couldn't erase everything overnight. Instead, they reached across the space between you and said they wanted one honest beginning, without secret mess.